at the end of the day, like a lot of this was on Soul. Like they wrote him as like a good person. He had good intentions, but he took a lot of agency away from those little girls. And I don't think he was willing to like see it that way.
Crazy Stupid Podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if this is your first time watching, we'd love it if you could hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell so that you are aware of when we post things.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. Before we begin, we have not been introducing ourselves in these videos.
So with that...
My name is Esther.
And I'm Adrian.
And also we're married. Acolyte wrapped up this week. I guess we can just kind of start with our overall thoughts about it.
Earlier today, you said you like this more than Ahsoka.
Yeah, I like it more than all of them except for Andor, personally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you like it more than season 2 Mandalorian?
Yes. I think some of the shows required you to already have an attachment to the characters, and that's why they made them. And I didn't really have a huge attachment to Ahsoka.
Yeah.
I didn't have a huge attachment to Boba Fett. I mean, I watched Clone Wars, and I enjoyed it. It wasn't for me. I wasn't the target audience for those shows, so I just, whatever.
There does tend to feel a little bit of a subpar tendency for some of the shows. Maybe Disney just kind of wanted something that was a little bit low stakes, and maybe that's just kind of what they're going for. Like, they don't always have the budget to do this very like sweeping cinematic television experience that's kind of like on the level of like a Game of Thrones. But I think what makes it difficult for the Disney Plus model that they have created with this sort of 8 episode, 35 to 43 minutes is that you're using blockbuster characters and putting them on a smaller scale. Kind of like what they tried to do with Secret Invasion with Nick Fury. It's like you have these characters like Nick Fury that is a very big deal. You have Rhodey that was in all of the Avengers movies. He was in Civil War. He was in the Iron Man films. Because of who's on the screen should feel bigger. And so they always tend to feel a little anticlimactic to me. And that, I think, has sort of been why the love for Andor has sort of grown over the last couple of years, because it feels like this is spectacle television, which is sort of what you would hope Star Wars would be, because that's what Star Wars is.
Part of this might just be a lesson around like maybe taking these movie characters and then trying to put them onto the small screen, the TV screen, is just really hard to do. Like maybe that's just not easy to do. What I liked about Andor and with Acolyte is they added to the Star Wars world and they added layers to the Star Wars message and like the Star Wars theme, because for better or for worse, like it doesn't always do the best job, but it does have these themes that come up that they try to explore through the films. They don't always do it perfectly, but they do try to do it. And I think Andor and Acolyte, out of all the shows, have done the most to add to that part of Star Wars. And that's the part that I find the most interesting personally.
The other thing that I would say is I had a conversation with my friend about this. I think where Star Wars failed is kind of where the MCU succeeded. For the most part, things were sort of moving in like a chronological order.
I was going to say that,
Right. So you could check off all the boxes to make sure, wow, my voice cracked right there. That's kind of funny. Things didn't feel like unsatisfied.
Yeah.
But we suffered a little bit with that in where the Star Wars sort of has gone. And so you've got all these TV shows that have had to sort of go back and fill in the gaps. Clone Wars, Rebels, Rogue One sort of did something similar. Parts in Mandalorian where they're clearly leading up to how Luke is creating this new Jedi and the idea of cloning. And that's how we get Palpatine. The New Republic falling. Star Wars has had to do that more than any other like popular IP, like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. Anytime those people wanted to do that, it was because like they wanted to. They didn't have to do it. But I feel like there's these elements where like there's all of this space with Kenobi's character and Luke's character and Anakin's character right after the fall, before the original films come out, where it's like, what happened there? For some reason, they haven't found the way to sort of explore that. And I felt sort of similar to that with Acolyte also. When you go that route, sometimes it can just feel a little anticlimactic. I enjoyed it, but to me, it still felt like course correcting.
All right, let's talk about Acolyte. One of the biggest things that this made me realize is that, I don't know know why doesn't it click for me before, but like the Jedi are law enforcement essentially. And I know that like eventually like the stormtroopers are like really the entity that we're supposed to, I think, correlate to law enforcement, like as the story goes on. But prior to them and the Empire, it's the Jedi.
Yeah, that shift of power was towards them.
Yeah. That understanding has like shifted the way I see this entire story now. And especially the way that they behaved in this series.
I don't remember what her name is. The actor who she plays Trinity in The Matrix.
Oh yeah, I don't remember her character.
I'm just going to always remember her as Trinity. I can't. But I love what she says to Soul, that like it's not our decision for what's best for these two girls. Even if Soul is convinced that this is something that would benefit Osha and May, she's the one that kind of says like, it's not up to you. At the end of the day, like a lot of this was on Soul. Like they wrote him as like a good person. He had good intentions, but he took a lot of agency away from those little girls. And I don't think he was willing to like see it that way.
The reason why he as an individual is not able to see it that way, but also the reason why the Jedi as a whole have a problem with like recognizing the flaws in their ideology is because they have this issue with like assumed goodness. Like they assume that like because they are who they are, that they are the good guys and the good people doing the right thing in all of these situations. It's very similar, honestly, to like cops in real life.
Yeah.
Like because they are cops, because they are police and law enforcement on the side of the law, they have an assumed idea about like their own moral authority. You can see it's very difficult for them to like get out of that mindset. And it's the same thing here. And a lot of that is because of the way that they recruit people. Obviously, if you're recruiting children and then you are raising them up to have this idea about this culture that they're in, you're not going to have a lot of criticism from within the organization. And also they project that image out into the world. And so it doesn't seem like there's even a lot of criticism from outside of the organization either.
Well, they do a lot of politicizing to shield themselves from criticism.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also there's not a lot of oversight because they have access to the Force, like because they're the Force sensitive people and they are the ones with the ability to manipulate it and use it and all that stuff. There's just not that much oversight over what they do. It also seems like they like to gatekeep it a little bit and gatekeep who has access to it and its power. And it's like on the one hand, I can understand that because it is, you know, it's a very powerful thing and like, you know, power in the wrong hands, etc., etc. But on the other hand, it is a naturally occurring phenomenon that is accessible to anybody who can access it. You cannot control or regulate that. Like it just is in the world.
Yeah.
But you see that they try to. And that also feels strange to me.
I think what makes that logic flawed is there was a lot of assumptions being made about Maze and Osha's culture and almost associating it with like Sith dark side like to an extent. But in actuality, the things that they were doing were like virtually innocent.
Yeah.
They were not harming anyone else. But you had already made that decision as Jedi to consolidate the power of the Force, that anyone outside of that would be inherently evil. And that I found very interesting because Soul, when he was spying on them, he only got bits and pieces of the things that they were doing, bits and pieces of their activities, bits and pieces of their culture, like when he was spying on May and Osha, or when he got glimpses of what May and Osha's parents were doing. And because of the sort of presumptive innocence that the Jedi have taught themselves, that forced him to fill in the blanks about everything else that he didn't understand about that culture. And it led him to the conclusion that you all cannot be trusted. A lot of the criticism that people had was like the Jedi are good people. But I actually think personally, the show does not disagree with that.
No.
They are not inherently wrong people. And I think the Acolyte actually like protects them a little bit from that accusation because you see the good intent behind the things that they're doing. And I love that, yes, there's a lot of manipulating that Palpatine did towards the Jedi, but it was also kind of like he took advantage of like portions within the Jedi Council's practices. And that's what made them vulnerable. It wasn't just individual Jedi that he exploited, but rather I could use these customs that you have been perpetuating for years against you because they're so inherently flawed.
I think part of the problem and the reason why people have a hard time seeing that is because the movies are framed as a good versus evil plot. Part of what the problem is with the Jedi themselves is that that's how they see it. Like they also are seeing this as like it's a good versus evil. It's a us, the protectors of all that is good, versus them. Everybody else who gets a hold of this power and is not using it in the precise way that we think it should be used. But this entire show sort of like flipped that entire thing on its head. When you first meet the stranger, I'm thinking that's what we're about to get into. He's on the dark side of the Force. He's a bad guy with bad intentions, and we need to take care of him. But by the end of the series, I liked him and I was personally rooting for him to get away. Even when we see what happens with Osha when she makes her saber bleed, that's an indication that she is now on the dark side of the Force, but we also see she is not a bad person.
Yeah.
Like that we've spent all this time with her. It's just not about like the individuals. Going back to like what you were saying about Soul and the connection to law enforcement and cops and police, this is kind of why I don't really like that phrase ACAB, like all cops are bad. I don't personally use that phrase because I think the idea is for it to get across that idea of like the system is bad. And so nobody within it can like operate
within like inherently bad system.
Yeah. But like the language doesn't always communicate that. And so it sounds like you are making a statement about the cops as individuals. And like that weakens the greater point that we're trying to get across. This system is bad, regardless of the goodness or badness of all the individual people involved. You could watch the show and you could see Osha and you could be like, well, she like obviously wants to be a part of the Jedi. Like obviously like she wants to go there. And like even her mom was going to allow her to like make that decision for herself. Even that is a bit more complicated because it's clear that she wants to be a Jedi partially because of the ideas that she has about who the Jedi are. Like, and all of that is dependent on the way that they have presented themselves as the representative of all that is good in the galaxy, right? Yeah. Like that's their entire image. And they lie like this and they do these cover-ups to protect that image, to ensure that they can continue to present themselves that way to all of these people. And in turn, it like continues and keeps this cycle going. Like once she's in the Jedi, she can't stay because it's not going to work. It's not a personal failure on her end. It just isn't something that she can do. It's not a reasonable ask of her. She had these ideas about it, and that's really the reason why she wanted to do it in the first place. You can't even really say that they are like protecting people's agency and like letting them quote unquote choose because number one, they're children and like some kids really do know what they want, but you can wait a few years. Like you can wait a few years and let them become a fully fleshed out person before they make this major commitment.
A lot of people talk with good intentions and with bad intentions that there was some like queer coding happening in the show. Like obviously like you had the two parents that were both women. But one thing that I was really thinking about was just due to the climate that we're in right now with the LGBTQ community and the concepts of the state trying to dictate how much freedom parents can allow their kids to identify as. And you saw a little bit of that where I think it was May who ended up becoming the witch, right?
Yes.
Soul saw that as something inherently wrong, even though he didn't fully understand what she was experiencing or what the parents allowed her to only make that choice. He assumed because one, it was a little bit foreign, and because two, it didn't fit within the confines of what he saw as right or wrong, that he needed to then protect Osha from making that similar mistake. A lot of what we're seeing in that episode really is the parents and the other witches trying to convey to these Jedi that one, we are innocent, two, you're overstepping your boundaries, and three, like she says, I was going to let her go. I'm keeping my commitment of letting them have agency over who they're choosing to be at this point of life. I don't think it was like a clear, like they're trying to like have a commentary on like, particularly with like trans kids in particular, because that was something like protect kids and
Yeah.
But the message of the state overreach to me felt like it was very similar with just the climate that we're in right now. You don't fully understand it, but the parents do because they're around their kids all the time. They know those kids. They know who they are. They know who they want to be. They know who they identify as. The state just will never have that access to it. And so to try to dictate who those kids can and can't be should never be left up to the state. And the Jedi overreach in that episode, in my opinion.
I also think that he has this idea that they're in danger. Osha and May are in danger and like they need to be rescued and saved. His belief is that they are safe in the Jedi Order, which is just so strange to me because I'm like, the Jedi Order is essentially you're drafting children into the military.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's actually what you're doing. I'm like, it's also like you cannot see the similarities in your two cultures. Like, you cannot see how actually the thing that you think they are doing that is so wrong and dangerous is actually very similar to what your own ideology, your own belief system also does. Like, you're afraid for these children because you feel like they're being used by these witches for whatever nefarious purposes as you assumed they had. And to be clear, like, it's clear that the witches had a purpose for them and we don't know what it is as far as I can tell. So I don't know what they were going to do and we don't know, but you also don't know. And you did no investigation at all. You just kind of went for it.
Yeah.
But like, that's not different from what the Jedi Order does. Like, that's actually quite similar. You also use children for your own purposes. It's just not that different. And the fact that like he couldn't see that they are the same, it's just kind of mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. This is now twice that you've been complicit in some stuff, which...
Yeah, you know what? And the fact that he was there, because something else that we had said was that, like, why don't y'all ever learn? Like,
no repercussions.
Why does the Jedi Order like does not learn from their mistakes because they don't take accountability? But it's like, this is kind of a thing that like reoccurs pretty frequently for you guys. Yoda, why don't you learn? Like, fine, everybody else, it's kind of hard to learn when there's huge cover-ups happening. You don't know everything that's going on. Fine, but Yoda?
Yeah. I would also say what makes this unique is that these aren't one-offs. They have the cover-up that happens with May and Osha and their parents. They do the cover-up that happens with Soul. But also, there were other Jedi that left and fell to the dark side, not just with the stranger, but also Count Dooku had a similar experience where he was trying to get across like the flaws of that was sort of happening. I would even make the case that with Qui-Gon, he may not have gone to the dark side, but at some point he probably would have left the Order because of how frustrated he was getting with their culture and their structure and how they ran things. Ahsoka left, and we eventually get to Anakin falling to the dark side.
This honestly might be a messaging issue, or I don't really know where to go with this, but the dark side, it's always framed as like indulging your anger, indulging your like
emotions,
these like negative, quote unquote negative, because emotions are not good or bad, but these quote unquote negative emotions. I don't know. I just like, there's just something there. Like, and I'm not sure if Star Wars is honestly even sure what they're trying to say with that.
I think as years have gone on, they have made that feeling side a little bit more authentic. When Luke feels like he fails and then Yoda comes up as a Force ghost, he takes all of those rules that the Jedi has and he throws it into the fire. To me, I sort of see that as an example of like, it's time for us to move on. Like, that was a reoccurring theme in The Last Jedi. Like, let the past die. Kylo Ren used it in a sense of like, these old notions of the Jedi, like, move on, we can create something new here, obviously in a very nefarious way. But Yoda uses that same idea of like, the way that we had practices of the Jedi clearly didn't work. And it forced people to suppress a lot of feelings, and it led them to making very questionable decisions. And so he throws it into the fire. If you don't like the sequels or not, I like the sequels because I think it rights a wrong in my book. And I think that's one of them for me personally. But I think that was it. But yeah, I'd rank it like a 6.5, 7 out of 10.
I'd give it like an 8.
Wow, that's high. I think just give it either more episodes or longer episodes. I think you do all right. Nonetheless, we'd love to know what you all think. Let us know in the comments below. All right, everyone. Thank you all so much, and we will see you all next time. Peace.